Welcome to True.
The Unsung Hero of Omaha Beach, Act 1, The Man Behind the Wrench. Opening sequence, June 6, 1944. The largest amphibious invasion in human history is about to begin. Over 150,000 Allied troops are crossing the English Channel toward the beaches of Normandy, their vessels cutting through dark, churning waters. The fate of Western civilization hangs in the balance. Among them, thousands of stories of courage that would never be told, thousands of heroes whose names would fade into obscurity. This is one of them, Dr. Margaret Holloway, military historian, Georgetown University. When we talk about D-Day, we remember the soldiers who stormed the beaches, the rangers who scaled the cliffs at Point du Hoc, the paratroopers who dropped behind enemy lines. But we often forget the men at sea, the sailors, the engineers, the mechanics who kept those ships running under impossible conditions. Without them, there would have been no invasion. Narrator, V.O. The USS Samuel B. Roberts, a John C. Butler-class destroyer escort, was assigned to provide naval gunfire support for the troops landing at Omaha Beach. On board was Private First Class Ethan Mitchell, a 23-year-old mechanic from rural Pennsylvania who would become one of the most unlikely heroes of the entire operation. A man whose quick thinking and steady hands would save hundreds of lives, and who would return home to complete anonymity. The background, archival photographs of 1920s, rural Pennsylvania. Narrator, V.O. Ethan James Mitchell was born on March 14, 1921, in the small coal mining town of Clearfield, Pennsylvania. Population 8,000, a place where men worked with their hands, where the mines ran deep, and where the Great Depression hit harder than almost anywhere else in America. Robert Mitchell, Ethan's nephew. Uncle Ethan could fix anything. Anything. I remember my dad, Ethan's younger brother Thomas, telling me stories about how, when Ethan was just 12 years old, he rebuilt an entire tractor engine using nothing but parts from a junkyard and a manual he'd borrowed from the library. The owner of the local garage, Mr. Henderson, hired him on the spot when he was 14, paid him in cash and meals. Sarah Mitchell Williams, Ethan's daughter. My grandfather, Ethan's father, worked in the coal mines for 32 years. He wanted something different for his sons. He saw that Ethan had a gift, a way of understanding machines that couldn't be taught. Dad used to say his father would bring home broken tools from the mine, and young Ethan would figure out how to fix them. Narrator, V.O. But life in Clearfield wasn't easy. The Mitchell family, like most families in town, struggled through the Depression. Ethan's mother, Mary, took in laundry. His father, James, worked double shifts when he could get them. Young Ethan contributed what he could from his work at the garage. Colonel James Bradford, a retirat, naval historian. Mitchell represented a very specific type of American serviceman that proved invaluable during World War II. He wasn't from a military family. He didn't attend West Point or Annapolis. He hadn't grown up with privilege or advanced education. But he had something that couldn't be taught in any academy: practical intelligence, problem-solving ability, and the capacity to improvise under pressure. The military didn't make men like Mitchell. America did. Dr. Holloway. When we study the generation that won World War II, we often focus on the officers, the strategists, the leaders, but the war was won by men like Ethan Mitchell, working-class Americans who understood machinery, who could adapt, who didn't panic when things went wrong. They were the backbone of the war effort. The call to service. Archival footage of Pearl Harbor aftermath. Narrator, V.O. December 7, 1941. Pearl Harbor. The Japanese attack that would drag America into World War II killed 2,403 Americans and wounded 1,178 others. The nation was stunned, outraged, and united in a way it had never been before. Sarah Mitchell Williams. Dad was 20 years old, working full-time at Henderson's garage. He was engaged to my mother, Catherine. They were planning to get married in the spring of 1942, but when Pearl Harbor happened, everything changed. He told me he was listening to the radio in the garage when the news came through. He finished the job he was working on, cleaned his tools, and walked straight to the Navy recruiting office. Narrator, V.O. 3 weeks after Pearl Harbor, on December 28, 1941. Ethan Mitchell enlisted in the United States Navy. He was one of 16 million Americans who would serve in uniform during the war. His fiancée, Catherine, supported his decision, though it meant postponing their wedding indefinitely. Robert Mitchell. My Aunt Catherine told me that Ethan didn't see it as a choice. He said, "They attacked us. We have to fight back." It was that simple for him, and I think he also knew that his skills, his ability to fix things, would be valuable. And narrator, VO. Mitchell's instincts were correct. His technical skills were immediately recognized during basic training at the Naval Training Station in Great Lakes, Illinois. Admiral Richard Townsend, retired former naval training commander. The Navy needed men who understood engines, hydraulics, electrical systems. Modern naval warfare was as much about engineering as it was about fighting. A ship dead in the water is a ship that can't fight. Mitchell's aptitude tests showed exceptional mechanical reasoning. He was exactly the kind of recruit we needed. Training and assignment. Training footage from World War II. Narrator, VO. After basic training, Mitchell was assigned to Advanced Engineering and Gunnery School at the Naval Gun Factory in Washington, D.C. For 6 months, he learned the intricacies of naval weapons systems, particularly the 5-inch 38 caliber dual-purpose gun that would become standard on destroyers and destroyer escorts. Colonel Bradford. The 5-inch 38 was an engineering marvel. It could fire 20 rounds per minute, reach targets up to 9 miles away, and engage both surface targets and aircraft. But it was also a complex machine with over 800 moving parts. Keeping these guns operational required constant maintenance and, during battle, quick repairs under pressure. Narrator, VO. Mitchell excelled in gunnery school. His instructors noted his exceptional diagnostic ability and calm demeanor under simulated combat conditions. By the spring of 1943, he had been promoted to private first class and received his assignment, the USS Samuel B. Roberts, a newly commissioned destroyer escort. Dr. Thomas Richards, naval architecture historian. The destroyer escorts, or DEs, were smaller than fleet destroyers, but incredibly versatile. They were designed for convoy escort duty, anti-submarine warfare, and fire support. The Samuel B. Roberts was 306 feet long, displaced 1,350 tons, and carried a crew of 215 men. She was armed with 2 5-inch guns, 340 mm anti-aircraft guns, and depth charges. William Bill Harrison, former Seaman First Class, USS Samuel B. Roberts. I met Ethan when he came aboard in April of '43. We were both in our early 20s, both from small towns. I was from Iowa. Right away, you could tell Ethan was different. He wasn't a loudmouth. He didn't brag, but when something broke, he was the guy everybody wanted. The officers knew it too. Narrator, VO. The USS Samuel B. Roberts spent the rest of 1943 on convoy escort duty in the Atlantic, protecting merchant ships from German U-boats. It was dangerous, exhausting work. Mitchell quickly earned a reputation as the man who could fix anything. Bill Harrison. One time, we were in the middle of the Atlantic, and the targeting system on Mount 2 went down. The gunner's mate was stumped. The officers were worried we'd have to return to port. Ethan worked on it for 12 hours straight. Turned out it was a faulty relay, a tiny component buried deep in the system. Nobody else would have found it. He did. Lieutenant Commander Douglas Hayes. Ratra, former gunnery officer, USS Samuel B. Roberts. Private First Class Mitchell was the best troubleshooter I ever worked with in 30 years of naval service. He had an intuitive understanding of how systems worked. More importantly, he didn't panic. In the Navy, panic kills. Mitchell never panicked. Preparation for invasion. Archival footage of invasion preparations in England. Narrator, VO. By late 1943, it was clear to everyone in the military that something massive was being planned. Hitler's Third Reich controlled most of continental Europe. The only way to defeat Nazi Germany was a direct assault on occupied France, an invasion across the English Channel. In February 1944, the USS Samuel B. Roberts received new orders: report to Portsmouth, England for special operations. Dr. Stephen Ambrose Memorial Institute D-Day historian. Operation Overlord. The invasion of Normandy was the most complex military operation ever attempted. It required coordinating land, sea, and air forces from multiple nations, over 5,000 ships, 11,000 aircraft, and 150,000 troops in the first wave alone. The planning took over a year. Bill Harrison. When we got to England, the whole atmosphere changed. The ports were packed with ships, more ships than I'd ever seen in my life. Battleships, cruisers, destroyers, landing craft, tens of thousands of soldiers and sailors. You could feel the tension. Something huge was coming. Narrator, Vo. The spring of 1944, southern England became one vast military camp. Security was absolute. Nobody knew when or where the invasion would take place, only that it was coming. For the crew of the USS Samuel B. Roberts, the waiting was agonizing. They drilled constantly. Every system was checked and rechecked. Bill Harrison. Ethan was different during those weeks before the invasion. More focused, more intense. He'd spend hours going over every component of the guns, every hydraulic line, every electrical connection. He'd make the gun crews run through loading drills over and over. Some of them complained, but Ethan just said, "When we're in combat, you'll thank me." Sarah Mitchell Williams. In his journal, which we found after he passed, Dad wrote about those days in England. He wrote about fear, about responsibility. He knew that if the guns failed in combat, men would die. That weight was on him. Actor voice. Reading journal entry. April 18th, 1944, another day of drills. The tension is getting to everyone. I inspected Mount 3 for the 4th time this week. Everything looks good, but I can't shake this feeling that I'm missing something. These guns have to work. When the time comes, they have to work. I think about Catherine every night. I hope I make it home to her. The eve of battle. Archival footage of troops preparing for invasion. Narrator, Vo. June 5, 1944. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, Supreme Commander of the Allied Expeditionary Force, faced the most important decision of the war. The weather over the English Channel was terrible. High winds, rough seas, low clouds. Some advisors recommended postponing the invasion, but Eisenhower gave the order, "Okay, we'll go." Colonel Bradford. Eisenhower's decision took extraordinary courage. He knew that if the invasion failed, tens of thousands of men would die, and the war might be lost. The Germans were expecting an invasion at Calais, not Normandy. Surprise was on the Allies' side, but only if they moved now. Narrator, Vo. The USS Samuel B. Roberts was assigned to Task Force 124, part of the Western Naval Task Force under Rear Admiral Alan Kirk. Their mission: provide naval gunfire support for the troops landing at Omaha Beach. Lieutenant Commander Hayes. On the evening of June 5th, I gathered the crew and told them what we were about to do. You could see it in their faces: fear, determination, resolve. These were kids, most of them, 20, 21 years old, but they were ready to do their duty. Bill Harrison. The night before D-Day, Ethan was down in the gun bay until 0200 hours. I asked him if he was worried. He just looked at me and said, "These guns are going to work. I'll make sure of it." Narrator, Vo. At 0300 hours on June 6, 1944, the invasion fleet began crossing the Channel. In 12 hours, the fate of the war and the world would be decided. Act 2. The Longest Day. The Crossing. Dark, turbulent ocean footage. Narrator, Vo. The crossing was treacherous. Rough seas made many soldiers violently ill. Waves 12 feet high tossed the landing craft like toys. But for the crew of the USS Samuel B. Roberts, the focus was singular: reach the French coast and provide covering fire for the troops. Bill Harrison. That crossing was rough. The ship was pitching and rolling. Down in the gun bay, we were strapping everything down, making sure nothing would come loose during the bombardment. Ethan was moving from gun to gun, checking everything one last time. Colonel Bradford. Naval gunfire support was absolutely critical to the invasion plan. The Germans had spent 4 years fortifying the Atlantic Wall. Concrete bunkers, machine gun nests, artillery positions, all designed to slaughter anyone who tried to land on those beaches. Without the Navy's big guns, the infantry wouldn't have stood a chance. Narrator, Vo. As dawn broke over the Normandy coast, the enormity of what lay ahead became clear. Dr. Antoine Dubois, French military historian. The German 352nd Infantry Division was positioned at Omaha Beach, one of their best units. The Allies didn't know they were there. This would turn Omaha into the bloodiest beach of the entire invasion. Battle begins. Archival footage of naval bombardment. Narrator, Vo. At 0550 hours, the naval bombardment began. The USS Samuel B. Roberts opened fire on German positions. Bill Harrison. The noise was unbelievable. The whole ship shook with every salvo. We could see the explosions on shore, massive plumes of smoke and fire. We thought we were destroying everything. We were wrong. Dr. Holloway. The preliminary bombardment, despite its intensity, was largely ineffective. The German bunkers were built of reinforced concrete, several feet thick. Most of the defenses were intact. When the landing craft hit the beach, the men would be walking into a killing zone. Narrator, VO. At 0630 hours, the first wave hit Omaha Beach. Within minutes, it became clear that something had gone terribly wrong. Dr. Holloway. The landing craft were dropping men directly into concentrated machine gun fire. Some boats hit underwater obstacles and sank. Men drowned under the weight of their equipment. Those who made it to the beach were pinned down, unable to advance. The casualties were devastating. Narrator, VO. American troops were pinned down on the beach, taking catastrophic losses. Their survival depended on naval gunfire to suppress the German positions. Radio operator, VO. We're taking heavy fire. Need immediate naval support on coordinates. Troops are pinned down. We can't move forward. The crisis. Interior of ship, gun mount. Narrator, VO. At 0715 hours, as the USS Samuel B. Roberts prepared to fire another salvo, disaster struck. Bill Harrison. We heard this awful grinding sound from gun mount 3. Then nothing. The gun was dead. Colonel Bradford. In the middle of a naval bombardment, losing a gun is catastrophic. You're reducing your firepower by 20% at the exact moment when every round counts. Men on the beach were dying, and we just lost a critical weapon. Narrator, VO. The 5-inch naval gun was a marvel of engineering, but also a complex system with hundreds of moving parts. Under combat conditions, any number of things could fail. Bill Harrison. The gunner's mate tried to troubleshoot it, but he couldn't figure it out. That's when the captain called for Ethan. Lieutenant Commander Hayes. I knew Mitchell was our best hope. If anyone could fix it, it was him. But the Germans were starting to return fire. Shore batteries were finding our range. It was a hell of a thing to ask. Narrator of O. Private First Class. Ethan Mitchell climbed into the gun mount as explosions rocked the ship. German shore batteries had begun returning fire. He was 23 years old. Hundreds of lives might depend on what he did in the next few minutes. The diagnosis. Dramatic reenactment of Mitchell working on the gun. Dr. Holloway. You have to understand the environment Mitchell was working in. The ship is moving. There are explosions all around. The gun mount itself is a cramped, dangerous space, and lives are depending on him fixing this problem in minutes, not hours. Narrator, VO. Mitchell began his diagnosis methodically, despite the chaos around him. Robert Mitchell. My uncle told me years later that he forced himself to block everything else out. He said it was like being back in the garage in Pennsylvania, just him and a broken machine. Colonel Bradford. The 5-inch .38 caliber gun had several critical systems. There was the loading mechanism, the elevation and traverse systems, the firing circuit, and the recoil system. A failure in any one of them could disable the gun. Narrator, VO. Mitchell quickly eliminated the obvious culprits. The loading mechanism was functional. The firing circuit had power. That left the recoil system. Bill Harrison. He found it. One of the hydraulic lines had cracked, probably from the concussion of all the firing. Hydraulic fluid was leaking out, and without pressure, the recoil mechanism couldn't reset. Narrator, VO. It was a death sentence for the gun. The hydraulic line would need to be replaced, a repair that normally took hours in a dry dock. Colonel Bradford. This is where Mitchell's genius came in. He didn't have hours. He didn't even have minutes, but he also didn't have a spare hydraulic line. Narrator, VO. Mitchell would have to improvise. Act 3. The repair, the solution. Close-up of hands working on machinery. Narrator, VO. With German artillery finding their range and American troops dying on the beach below, Mitchell made a decision that would define his legacy. Robert Mitchell. He told me he remembered something from his days working on tractors. When a hydraulic line failed in the field and you didn't have a replacement, there was a trick, a temporary patch that could hold pressure long enough to finish the job. Colonel Bradford. Mitchell cut away the damaged section of the line. Then he used copper wire and rubber gasket material, which he had to cannibalize from another non-critical system, to create a compression fitting. Theoretically, it could hold hydraulic pressure, but under the shock of repeated firing, that was anyone's guess. Dr. Holloway. What's remarkable is not just the technical ingenuity, but the courage. If his repair failed catastrophically while the gun was firing, it could have caused an explosion that would have killed everyone in the gun mount. Bill Harrison. I was standing right outside the gun mount when Ethan came out. He was covered in hydraulic fluid and grease. He just looked at the captain and said, "She'll fire, sir, but I don't know for how long." Narrator. Vo. Mitchell insisted on being present in the gun mount for the test firing. If something went wrong, he wanted to be there. Lieutenant Commander Hayes. Mitchell said, "Sir, I've patched the hydraulic line. She'll fire, but I don't know for how long. I asked him if he thought it would hold. He said, maybe, if we're lucky." That was good enough for me. The counterattack. Maps showing German artillery positions. Narrator. Vo. At 0745 hours, the Germans launched a coordinated counterattack. Dr. Dubois. German artillery at Point du Hoc had been silent during the initial bombardment, hidden and protected. Now they opened fire on the ships, and they were accurate. Narrator. Vo. A nearby destroyer took a direct hit. The USS Samuel B. Roberts was bracketed by shells. The German gunners were zeroing in. Colonel Bradford. This was the critical moment. The Germans had the range. They were about to destroy the naval support the troops desperately needed. Mitchell's gun, Gun Mount 3, had the best angle on the German battery. Narrator. Avio. The order came down from the bridge. Mount 3, target the German battery at Point du Hoc. Fire for effect. Bill Harrison. The gun crew looked at each other. We all knew that gun was held together by copper wire and rubber. If it failed, we could die. But if we didn't fire, more men on the beach would die. See? The turning point. Archival footage of naval gunfire. Narrator. Vo. At 0748 hours, Gun Mount 3 fired. Mitchell's repair held. Bill Harrison. That first shot, we all held our breath. The gun fired, the recoil system worked, and Ethan's patch held. Then they fired again, and again. Colonel Bradford. Gun Mount 3 fired 18 rounds in rapid succession. The German battery was destroyed. The counterattack was broken. Dr. Holloway. In that moment, Mitchell's repair changed the course of the battle. With the German artillery silenced, the naval gunfire could focus on supporting the troops on the beach. Narrator. Vo. By 0900 hours, American forces were finally able to push off the beach and begin taking the German positions. The crisis at Omaha Beach had passed. Bill Harrison. How many lives did Ethan save that day? I don't know. Dozens? Hundreds? All I know is that without that gun, without his repair, more of our boys would have died on that beach. Narrator. Vo. Gun Mount 3 continued firing throughout the battle. Mitchell's improvised patch held through over 200 rounds, far beyond what anyone thought possible. The aftermath of battle. Aerial footage of Omaha Beach at day's end. Narrator. Vo. By nightfall on June 6, 1944, the immediate battle for Omaha Beach was over. The Americans had broken through the German defenses and established a foothold in Normandy, but the cost had been staggering. Dr. Holloway. Over 2,400 American casualties at Omaha Beach alone, killed, wounded, or missing. It was the bloodiest of all the D-Day beaches, but military historians agree that without naval gunfire support, the casualties could have been twice as high. The invasion might have failed entirely. Narrator. Vo. Aboard the USS Samuel B. Roberts, the crew stood down from battle stations for the first time in 16 hours. Mitchell's improvised repair had held through the entire battle. Bill Harrison. When we finally had a chance to inspect the gun, we couldn't believe it. Ethan's patch was barely holding together. The captain said it was a miracle it hadn't failed. Ethan just shrugged and said he'd make a proper repair in the morning. Lieutenant Commander Hayes. I recommended Mitchell for the Navy and Marine Corps Medal. I wrote a detailed report of what he'd done, how his repair had kept Mount 3 in the fight, how that gun had destroyed the German battery, how his actions had directly saved lives. But in the chaos after D-Day, the paperwork got lost. Mitchell never received his medal. Narrator. Vo. It would be 75 years before that oversight was corrected. Act 4. The Man Who Came Home. Continuing the war. Archival footage of naval operations in the Pacific. Narrator. Vo. The war didn't end on D-Day. For Ethan Mitchell and the crew of the USS Samuel B. Roberts, June 6, 1944, was just one day in a long conflict. The ship continued operating in European waters throughout the summer of 1944, supporting operations in France. Bill Harrison. After D-Day, Ethan was different, quieter. He'd always been focused on his work, but now there was something else. I think the weight of what happened, knowing that his work had meant life or death for so many men, it changed him. Narrator, Via. In September 1944, the USS Samuel B. Roberts was transferred to the Pacific Theater to support operations against Japan. Mitchell would serve aboard the ship until the end of the war. Lieutenant Commander Hayes. Mitchell continued to be our best mechanic, our best troubleshooter. Whenever something broke, whenever we had a problem that nobody else could solve, we called for Mitchell. He never let us down. Narrator, Vo. The war in the Pacific would rage for another year. Mitchell would see action at Leyte Gulf, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa. He would maintain the ship's guns through countless bombardments, always ensuring they worked when needed. Sarah Mitchell Williams. In his journal, Dad wrote about the other battles, but he never wrote about them the same way he wrote about D-Day. I think that day, June 6, 1944, was the day that defined him. Everything else was just doing his job. Coming home. Archival footage of victory celebrations. Narrator, Vo. August 15, 1945. Japan surrendered. World War II was over. For the millions of men and women in uniform, it was time to come home. Narrator, Vio. Ethan Mitchell returned to the United States in October 1945. Nearly 4 years after he'd enlisted, he was awarded the American Campaign Medal, the European African Middle Eastern Campaign Medal with 1 battle star, the Asiatic Pacific Campaign Medal with 3 battle stars, and the World War II Victory Medal, but he never received recognition for his actions on D-Day. Robert Mitchell. When Uncle Ethan came home, he didn't talk about the war. He didn't wear his medals. He didn't march in parades. He just went back to Clearfield, married my Aunt Catherine, and reopened his father's garage. Narrator, Vio. On November 2, 1945, Ethan Mitchell and Catherine Reynolds were married in a small ceremony at the Presbyterian Church in Clearfield. They would remain married for 53 years, until Catherine's death in 1998. Sarah Mitchell Williams. My parents had 3 children. I was the youngest. Dad ran Mitchell's garage for 50 years. He fixed cars, tractors, farm equipment, anything mechanical. He was known throughout the county as the man who could fix anything, but nobody knew what he'd done during the war. A life of quiet service. Photographs of post-war Clearfield. Narrator, Vio. For 5 decades, Ethan Mitchell lived a quiet life in Clearfield, Pennsylvania. He raised his children, ran his business, and served his community. He was a deacon at his church, a volunteer firefighter, and a Little League coach. Robert Mitchell. I grew up not even knowing Uncle Ethan had been at D-Day. He never talked about it. Once, when I was maybe 10 years old, I asked him what he did in the war. He just said, "I fixed things." That was it. Years later, I realized he'd told me the truth, but not the whole truth. Thomas Brennan, childhood friend of Sarah Mitchell Williams. Mr. Mitchell fixed my bicycle when I was a kid. I'd wrecked it pretty bad, bent the frame. My parents said we'd have to buy a new one, but Mr. Mitchell straightened the frame, rebuilt the whole bike. He wouldn't take any money. He said, "That's what neighbors do." That was the kind of man he was. Narrator, Vio. But Ethan Mitchell carried the memories of D-Day with him every day. He kept a journal throughout his life, and in it, he returned again and again to June 6, 1944. Actor voice. Reading journal entry. June 6, 1967, 23 years ago today. I always wonder about the men on the beach. Did my repair make a difference? I tell myself it did, but I think about the ones who didn't make it home. They were the heroes. I just fixed a gun. Sarah Mitchell Williams. Every year, on June 6th, Dad would get quiet. He'd go out to the garage and work alone. Mom told us not to bother him on that day. It wasn't until after he died that I read his journals and understood why. The Discovery. Modern footage of family looking through old documents. Narrator, Vio. Ethan Mitchell passed away on February 14th, 1998, at the age of 77. He'd lived to see his children grow, his grandchildren born, and his community flourish. His funeral was attended by over 300 people, a testament to the impact he'd had on his small town. Robert Mitchell. After Uncle Ethan died, we were going through his things. We found boxes of documents in the garage, his service records, commendations, and his journals. That's when we learned the truth about what he'd done on D-Day. Sarah Mitchell Williams. I read his account of D-Day, and I couldn't believe it. My father, this quiet, humble man who fixed cars and coached baseball, had been a hero. He'd saved lives, and he'd never told anyone. Narrator, V.O. The Mitchell family discovered that Lieutenant Commander Hayes had recommended Ethan for the Navy and Marine Corps Medal in 1944, but the paperwork had been lost in the chaos after the invasion. Mitchell had never received the recognition he deserved. Robert Mitchell. We decided we needed to do something. Uncle Ethan couldn't speak for himself anymore, but we could speak for him. We started researching, trying to find witnesses, documentation, anything that could help tell his story. Finding the witnesses, modern interviews and research footage. Narrator, V.O. The Mitchell family search led them to Bill Harrison, one of the few surviving crew members of the USS Samuel B. Roberts. Harrison was 94 years old and living in Iowa when Robert Mitchell contacted him in 2016. Bill Harrison. When I got the call about Ethan, I couldn't believe it. I thought, finally someone's going to tell his story. I'd carried that memory for 70 years. What Ethan did that day, it was extraordinary. He deserved to be remembered. Narrator, V.O. Harrison provided a detailed account of Mitchell's actions on D-Day, corroborating the information in Mitchell's journal. The family also located Lieutenant Commander Hayes's original commendation request in Navy archives, misfiled and forgotten for decades. Dr. Holloway. The Mitchell family's research was meticulous. They built an airtight case, demonstrating that Ethan Mitchell had performed an act of extraordinary heroism under fire. The evidence was overwhelming. Narrator, V.O. In 2017, the Mitchell family petitioned the Navy to posthumously award Ethan Mitchell the Navy and Marine Corps Medal. The petition was supported by detailed documentation, witness testimony, and letters from military historians. Colonel Bradford. When I reviewed the evidence, I was stunned that Mitchell had never been decorated. His actions clearly met the criteria for the Navy and Marine Corps Medal. Heroism not involving actual conflict with an enemy. He'd risked his life to repair critical equipment under fire, and his actions had directly contributed to the success of the D-Day invasion. Recognition at last. Footage of naval ceremony. Narrator, V.O. June 6, 2019, the 75th anniversary of D-Day. At a ceremony at the United States Naval Academy in Annapolis, Maryland, the Secretary of the Navy posthumously awarded the Navy and Marine Corps Medal to Private First Class Ethan James Mitchell.